Thank you for joining me today. Charlie, would you like to introduce yourself as we get started?
Sure. My name is Charlie Berthoud, and I am the pastor head of staff, the senior pastor essentially at Covenant Presbyterian Church on the west side of Madison. I've been there for about 13 years, and it's a great congregation and a great community.
Awesome. So you and I got coffee a couple weeks ago
Yeah.
and discussed all manner of things. And I was talking to you a little bit about this idea of juicy questions we've been dealing with and what does it mean to uplift stories of the church. And you shared a juicy question that you've been sitting with. And the question was this question, or like, what does evil mean in our world?
Yeah.
And I was very intrigued by this thinking and this pondering that you were doing. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about maybe first, why are you pondering that?
Yeah. Um, well, yeah, it's a good question, and I don't have the magic answers, but I've been pondering it because I'm concerned about what's happening in our world, in our country today. Um, And, I've been a pastor for 35 years, and pretty much every time I'm in a worship service, we say the Lord's Prayer, and
Mm,
that includes the phrase, deliver us from evil. In our Presbyterian tradition, when we welcome new members, when we celebrate baptisms, we had a baptism last Sunday. We asked the parents of this delightful 9-month-old kid, the first baptismal question is, do you turn from the ways of sin and renounce evil and its power in the world? Um, and the word evil is all over the scriptures. Um, Romans 12, that's a favorite chapter for a lot of people in the Bible. Um, what does it say? Turn from evil and do good, or what's the phrase? Hate what is evil and hold fast to what is good. And then it concludes one of my favorite verses in the Bible that I kind of use prayerfully in my own life. Romans 12:21, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And I think that's what God's trying to do with us Christians through Jesus to get us to become new people and work towards the good. The congregation I serve in Madison, filled with lots of really good and thoughtful people, trying to be good Christians, trying to be good citizens, trying to be good people in our world today. Um, there are increasing concerns in our congregation and obviously across the country about what's happening in Washington, the state of our government, and what's going on. Um, I know I'll just speak for me personally. I think my life has been much more comfortable and much more free of evil than the vast majority of humanity that has ever lived. A lot of people just deal birth to death with the evils of hunger, poverty, injustice, suffering, fear of being attacked by the neighboring community or the neighboring country, living in war zones and medically unstable situations. I don't, I'm sure I've had challenges in life. We all do, but not like the vast majority of people. And I find myself thinking about where we are as a country, um, and it concerns me. Um, you've got a trillionaire waving around a chainsaw, talking about how good the budget cuts are to U.S. Agency for International Development, that's going to leave billions of people essentially dead over the next 10, 20 years, according to everything we've heard. There's already been plenty of people who have died because of that. Um, sure, there's issues with bureaucracy, there's issues with inefficiency, but um, to me, that requires a surgical scalpel and not a chainsaw. And just
mm.
the glee at making those budget cuts, is that evil? It kind of feels like it to me. So what do we do in response to that as citizens and as Christians? I mean, if we're praying Sunday after Sunday, "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," what are we doing for that? So I feel like because of that call for us to be people of the kingdom, because of the reality of evil in the language of our tradition, I think we need to keep alert, Stand firm in your faith. Be courageous, be strong. Let everything you do be done in love. 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14, one of my favorite verses there. And just being aware of the reality of evil and wrestling with how we as Christians can respond to it.
Yeah. Well, and I'm even thinking about, from what you're saying, a little bit of the evil intents versus evil impacts. That idea of you're talking about like the glee with the chainsaw. And so like what I don't know what my I'm not sure what my question is, but I'm like that struck me in what you were talking about of sometimes our actions are evil and sometimes our in like the intentions we have are evil and the divide in that. I'm not sure what my question is, but I just that struck me as you're talking. And how do we hold those tensions that even, and maybe it's more of the sometimes we have impacts that are evil when we don't intend it, is one of the thoughts I'm having at the moment.
Yeah, and that's it when well, let me put it this way. Every Sunday in our tradition we have a prayer of confession.
Mm.
We confess our sins, and sometimes the focus is individual, sometimes it's collective. It needs to be both. And um, when we're talking about evil, intention, impact, we also have to look within and
Mm.
be aware that none of us is free from sin. None of us is free from getting misled. We all need to keep thinking about these things. So, I like the Presbyterian, the Reformed churches um, idea of church reformed, always reforming according to the Word of God. And I feel like that's what we all need to do, to thread this needle of being humble enough to recognize that I don't know everything, and also being bold enough and wise enough to be able to look at something and say that's evil and we need to call it out, and have this sort of continual interplay, just sort of a reality check to make sure I'm not being an arrogant jerk um, who who thinks I know everything, because I'm as capable of self-delusion as anybody. So there's some humility mixed in with that. But if we sit on the side of humility, then we stand there and do nothing all day and just think, well, everybody has a right to an opinion. And one way I think about that is with theological and political discussions. I am all for face-to-face conversations and people talking to each other and people listening to each other, people learning from each other, and respecting that I don't know everything and you don't know everything, and let's share our thoughts. But somewhere in there, um, there's kind of a deal breaker. If very hypothetically, if you said, well, my theology leads me to think that we should kill all the Irish people or something ridiculous like that, or historically Native people or Black people, or the language against certain groups has been pretty strong, and people have used theology to justify for that. For me, that's kind of a deal breaker. Like that's not going to get you a seat at the table if you're going to dehumanize. So I wrestle with that in terms of the way some people talk about lesbian, gay, transgender people, bisexual, transgender people. Um, I get that there are a lot of people who are uncomfortable with the idea. I get that it takes time for all of us to learn new things and appreciate new perspectives. Um, and genuine change takes time, which is hard to hear. And hard to live through. Um, but if somebody is steadfast in saying, because you're a lesbian or gay or bisexual or transgender, you're evil, you're not created in the image of God, for me, that's a deal breaker. But if someone isn't that extreme and uncomfortable with it, I'm willing to work with them and hope that they have a chance to meet people. And have that slow work of transformation. I've seen that happen 100 times. I saw it in my own mother. God bless her and God rest her soul. There was a gay pastor who officiated at my brother's interment at the memorial grounds at her home church. She knew that pastor because he was part of the church community, and she had relationships. So part of the whole thing for me about dealing with all of the challenges in our world right now, and the reality of what feels like is evil, is we need to double down on face-to-face contact and patiently courageously listening to one another, learning from one another, and interacting with one another. Because between COVID, between technological devices that suck us all in, and between the deep political divisions, we are as divided as in my 62 years, I can't remember a time when we're more divided from one another. And I really think if most people come together and listen to one another, they can think, okay, we're going to save a few $100 million, but 10 million people are going to die. That sounds evil to me. We need to do something.
I'm hearing a lot of like humanization versus dehumanization, and how do we continually lean into that humanization of people? How do
Hmm.
we keep seeing people? How do we, I don't know, love our neighbor like Jesus calls us to? And part of
Yeah,
loving your neighbor is to see them.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And for me, a lot of it means, um, for me as a Christian and in the congregation in which I serve, I think what we mainline Christians need to do, I can just speak for that sort of grouping of the church. Um, I feel like we need to do some reclaiming of our faith, and finding authentic Christian faith. I came across a quote um, a while ago, a tweet that came out, I think it was in like 2019, from what's his name, the guy who played Dwight on The Office, Rainn Wilson. And the quote I wrote down here, um, the metamorphosis of Jesus Christ from a humble servant of the abject poor to a symbol that stands for gun rights, prosperity theology, anti-science, limited government that neglects the destitute, and fierce nationalism is truly the strangest transformation in history. I've grown up in Presbyterian churches. I've been in Presbyterian churches. I've served in Presbyterian churches. And for the most part, I have loved those churches, but we don't talk about Jesus a lot.
Mm.
And that's a mistake, I think. And we've kind of ceded Jesus language, Jesus identity to the general public, which is part of where I see some of the evil in our country today, with the flag and the cross getting wrapped together in what some call, Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism, just really distorting the gospel and leading our country in some pretty dangerous places. So I think it's incumbent on churches to speak up, or at the very least within the church community, to try to reclaim that authentic faith and kind of push people out the door to live that faith. At Covenant, we talk about learning two things: learning God's love and living God's love. So I don't tell people what to think at Covenant. We ask a lot of questions. We engage with a lot of issues. We come together to try to learn about the love of God. And then I feel like when the benediction comes on Sunday, sometimes I'll stand with my arms up in different ways. I feel like I'm just kind of pushing people out the door and saying, okay, we've learned about the love of God. We've heard the call from Jesus to love our neighbors. Now you go do the stuff wherever you are, staying at home with your kids, or being a lawyer or a professor or a janitor or a teacher or whatever you are, you go do the stuff and resist the power of evil in our hearts and in our society. So kind of where I find myself.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Glad to talk with you.